I always pondered what may have happened to me. If I had been born a few years later, would I have received the same treatment from my parents as my sister did? Or, before they produced their masterpiece, would I still have been merely a failed draft? I'm Lauren Bennett, the oldest kid of a small Northern Californian town that most people would consider to be a typical middle-class family. However, my upbringing was everything from normal. My parents were attempting to create geniuses, not just nurture children. Richard Bennett, my father, was a software developer who was passionate about data. It was all about efficiency, results, and numbers. As a driven elementary school teacher, my mother, Catherine Bennett, read a ton of early childhood development books. She believed that every child might become a prodigy with the correct teaching techniques. I was the first to be affected. Math games, brain development activities, flashcards, and children's books were all piled high on our shelves. My mother had already started teaching me the alphabet and rudimentary math by the time I was 2 years old. Her disapproval was evident on her face if I didn't pick things up quickly enough. By the age of 3, family dinners had become into pop quizzes, rather than opportunities to share our days. What is France's capital city? How much is 8 times 9? What does photosynthesis mean? However, there was an issue. I wasn't a genius. I spoke and walked at my usual pace. Prior to kindergarten, I didn't read. By the time I was 4, I was unable to name all 50 states. Nothing about me was especially noteworthy. I was simply average. My mother began to sigh more deeply. My father stopped encouraging me as much. For some time, they persisted, but their zeal waned. I just knew that I had fallen short of their expectations. I had no idea what I had done wrong. Then came the birth of Haley. My parents treated her like a gift from heaven the moment she came. Haley was a name my mother had chosen with care. It implied quality and intelligence. I did not miss the irony. Haley had a full collection of educational instruments that stimulated my intellect, whereas I had grown up with wooden toys and coloring books from the dollar store. My mother immersed herself in the most recent studies on the development of children. Before Haley could even crawl, there were classes in infant sign language, sensory games, and flashcards. One evening, I sat in the corner and watched my mother display a flashcard that was bright red. "Sweetheart, this is a triangle. Can you say triangle?" When Haley rambled something like triangle, my parents exchanged glances as if they had just witnessed a miracle. Haley had just begun to walk. With wonder in his voice, my dad asked, "Lauren, do you see your sister? She has a gift. We're going to do everything we can to help her reach her full potential." I understood that to mean that she is unique. You're not either. I gradually lost my ability to be seen in my own home. I was merely the unsuccessful prototype, and Haley was the star child. As Haley's every accomplishment was hailed, as though she had suddenly found a cure for cancer, I faded into the background. I used to sneak away to my grandparents' place on the weekends. William and Margaret Bennett, my dad's parents, resided a few blocks away. The only people who ever treated Haley and me equally were them. Without selecting a preference, Grandma would distribute cookies and read to us both. Grandma Margaret once told me, "You are both wonderful in your own way," while I was cuddled up on the couch next her. No one is better than the other. My parents should have done it. However, it never did. I stopped hoping that anything I did would please my parents by the time I was 8 years old. It was useless, even when I tried. I once took a math test and received the highest score in my class. I virtually sprinted home to show my mom because I was so happy. She gave the paper a fleeting glance. The words, "Good job, sweetheart," escaped her mind. Her eyes then brightened. Haley just learned division. And she's only 6. Isn't that amazing? The exhilaration vanished as fast as it had risen, and I stood there with my test paper in hand. Whatever I did, it was never sufficient. However, what did Haley do? There was always reason to celebrate that. My parents went above and beyond when Haley's school day arrived. They enrolled her in Westwood Academy, a prestigious program for talented kids, after spending months investigating the top private schools. Along with the other regular kids, I strolled to the nearby public school in the interim. Every day, Haley brought back stories about her advanced classes and the fascinating field trips she had taken to science labs and museums. As she listened, my mother would nearly glow, taking in every word that Haley said. Additionally, Haley received expensive clothing, new toys, and gadgets as rewards for passing a test. When I did well on an exam, I received a hushed, hesitant good job. However, it wasn't until I became 13 that I really understood my role in the household. Since I was a young child, I had my own bedroom. It was mine, even though it wasn't very big. I had artfully arranged my bookshelves, adorned it with posters of my favorite bands, and gathered small mementos that gave me a sense of control over my life. Then, during dinner one evening, Haley stated, "Mom, Lauren's room is bigger than mine. I have so many books and study materials, I need more space to study." I glared at her. My folks wouldn't be serious about this, surely. Then I noticed them looking at each other. "She has a point," commented my father. My mother continued in a light-hearted and informal tone, "Lauren, do you really need such a big room?" As though she wasn't about to tear away the one item that felt like mine. "Of course I do," I exclaimed, attempting to seem less anxious than I actually was. However, my mother grinned that kind, patronizing grin I had come to despise. The smile that said the choice was already made. "You'll still have your own room, Lauren, just a smaller one. Haley needs the space for her studies. You understand, don't you?" No, I didn't comprehend, and I wouldn't. When I returned home from school the following day, it had already been completed. My belongings had been relocated to the adjacent smaller room. Haley had a smug little smile on her face as she arranged her books in my old room. She murmured, "Thanks, sis," without even raising her gaze. "I'll make good use of it." I just stood there, motionless. I'd just been wiped out, once more. As I lay on the tiny bed in my strange new room that night, I came to terms with the reality. I would always come in second in that house, regardless of my efforts and actions. I wish I could claim that following that, everything improved. But really, they worsened. My parents no longer even bothered to pretend after the room incident. They were focused on Haley, and I was just there, being. When Haley enrolled at Westwood Academy, it became brutally evident. Haley was being driven to her prestigious university, which featured an Olympic-sized pool and cutting-edge science facilities, while I was walking to my dull public school. Every morning, my parents almost gave her the red carpet, making sure she had all the newest school supplies and fussing over her uniform. I made my own lunch in the interim and went to school by foot by myself. I performed adequately in school, excellent ratings and a strong effort. It didn't matter, though. Haley was the one who met my parents' expectations of excellence. They weren't content with good enough. I once completed a science project and received an A+. It was a precise, painted model of a volcano that truly erupted with vinegar and baking soda. I couldn't wait to show my folks since I was so proud of it. My mother remarked, "That's great, sweetheart," hardly raising her eyes from her laptop. "Haley just placed first in the Westwood Science Fair. Isn't that amazing?" It was, of course. I could have cured cancer, and Haley could have found a new element, but only one of those things would have elicited a response from them. The highlights of Haley's life were endless. For me, it was background noise. What's the worst? Haley was aware of it. She wasn't exactly mean. She refrained from directly insulting me. She understood precisely what she was doing, though, judging by the arrogant little looks and the casual way she would bring up her schoolwork or her new acquaintances at Westwood. I tried to convince myself that it didn't matter. I put all of my effort into my studies, joined the track team, and even began working after school at the local library. It served as a diversion, but the resentment persisted. Then came the talk of college. The first time I brought it up, I was a junior in high school. For months, I had been reading about business degrees and determining which institutions offered the best networking possibilities as part of my university study. I was aware that Ivy League universities were not a possibility, but there were several good choices in the University of California system. I eventually plucked up the courage to bring it up over dinner one Sunday night. I tried to speak steadily as I added, "I've applied to a few universities. I really like the business program at UC Santa Barbara. It seems like a good fit for me." My father put down his fork. My mother's face became tense, Before either of them had even said a word, I had a horrible feeling in my gut. "We need to talk about that," my father stated. Painfully, my heart pounded in my chest. With a tone that was almost remorseful but not quite, my mother replied, "Lauren, we won't be able to support you financially. We need to focus on Haley's future." I blinked. "What?" "Haley has a real shot at an Ivy League school," my father continued. "We need to prepare for that." My voice grew sharper as I said, "You have to be kidding me. You think I don't deserve to go to college?" "It's not that, sweetheart," my mother responded in a sickly sweet voice. "It's just, you haven't shown the same potential as Haley." Under the table, my hands balled into fists. "So what am I supposed to do?" My dad remarked, "You could take out loans, as though that were the most sensible course of action. Or maybe find a job and work your way through school. College isn't for everyone, you know." "But Haley gets everything handed to her?" I said. Haley hardly raised her head from her phone when she sat at the other end of the table. "Haley has potential," observed my mother scathingly. That was the end of it. The last nail in the coffin was that. Without further word, I walked away from the table. I went directly to my grandparents' house on my legs. It wasn't until Grandma Margaret opened the door and saw my face that I realized I was crying. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" With a hard time speaking, I fell onto the couch. "They won't pay for my college," they said. "They said they need to save everything for Haley." My grandparents looked at each other. Not astonishment, just silent acceptance. They had anticipated this long before I did. Grandpa William took a seat next to me and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. He said steadily, "Lauren, you deserve this chance, and we won't let you fall behind." "But I can't afford it." "Yes, you can," interrupted Grandma Margaret. "Because we're paying for it." I looked up. "You what?" Grandpa remarked. "We've been saving for years. Not just for retirement. We always knew you'd need this one day." My throat constricted. "That's a lot of money." "I can't. You can, and you will," Grandma firmly stated. "We're not doing this out of obligation. We're doing this because you've earned it." That's where I broke down. This time, I was so relieved that I started crying, not because I was angry or offended, but because I felt like someone really, really believed in me. I felt seen for the first time in my life. The most significant turning moment in my life was attending college. The day following graduation, I left home and never returned. I knew I was meant to be at UC Santa Barbara as soon as I set foot on the campus. I worked hard even though I didn't have to worry about tuition because of my grandparents. I started working part-time in the campus finance department, where I handled paperwork and examined budget reports. I found out really quickly this was something I was good at. Risk management, corporate finance, and market movements all made sense. Nothing else ever made sense like it did. I was able to secure a competitive internship with a nearby financial business by my second year. They gave me practical assignments to work on, in addition to providing me with educational opportunities. The business was spared a significant financial loss, thanks to one of my reports. Then I was called into the department head's office. "Lauren, you have an eye for detail that not everyone does," he stated. "If you keep this up, you're going to go far in this industry." Walking on air, I walked out of that office. Someone in a position of power noticed me for the first time in my life. Not in the form of a shadow, not in second place, only me. At the University of Pennsylvania, Haley, meanwhile, was having the time of her life. My folks were so proud that they were virtually glowing. Even though Haley was their ideal child, they still neglected to text me back. However, I no longer gave a damn. I was no longer attempting to please them, since I didn't require it. I was constructing a personal project, according to my terms, and it was better than anything I could have ever gotten from their conditional affection. At least on paper, Haley's life was ideal. The University of Pennsylvania accepted her. The Ivy League school my parents had always wanted to attend. My mother shed happy tears when she received her admission letter. My father opened a champagne bottle, claiming that Haley was destined for greatness. They called all of the family members. Me? Not even an SMS message reached me. I didn't give a damn. I was too preoccupied with genuinely creating my life. I was able to land a paid internship with a reputable financial business by my sophomore year. My work was noticed by my instructors. My supervisor gave me actual projects to work on. Making wise financial decisions, evaluating risks, and studying market patterns were all things I had found I was quite strong at. Haley's life, meanwhile, appeared to be a meticulously manicured Instagram page. Pictures of her at upscale events, rooftop bars, and lavish holidays were all over her social media accounts. Haley and her pals holding expensive beverages while posing in fashionable attire. "Look how well Haley's doing," was one of the comments my mom would leave on screenshots of Haley's posts. They never inquired about me, of course. Haley appeared to be doing well at first. However, fissures appeared rather rapidly. On the phone one day, Grandma Margaret said, "She's not calling home much anymore." "Your mother said Haley's been struggling to keep up with her classes." I wasn't shocked. Haley had never been taught to fight. Growing up, my parents had removed every challenge from her path. Why should college be any different? But there was no safety net today. Nobody was able to finish her assignments or take her tests. My parents, however, maintained appearances. "Our girl is fitting right in," was the remark my mom sent me after Haley shared a photo of herself on the stairs of a luxury fraternity home with a group of well-dressed buddies. I choose to disregard it. I had given up on attempting to convince my parents that fitting in did not equate to success. After that, my grandparents' calls became increasingly urgent. One night, Grandpa William observed, "Haley's missing classes. Your mother's worried. She's been partying more than studying." "Dryly, let me guess," I said. "They'll probably just hire her a tutor or donate to the school to smooth things over." "They tried," answered Grandpa. "It didn't work. It was not long before everything fell apart." My granddad gave me a call a few months later. His tone was solemn and quiet. "Lauren, Haley's been suspended." I almost dropped my phone. "What?" Her grades collapsed. "She also got written up for some kind of disciplinary violation. Your parents are devastated." "Yeah, I bet. They didn't tell you?" "Of course not. My parents didn't call me when their golden child was struggling. They did so only when they had something to boast about." After a month, Haley was formally expelled. Grandma Margaret told me about it. Muttering softly, she moved back home. Grandma muttered, "Your parents are trying to figure out what to do next." Next steps? As though Haley were a malfunctioning project that need repair. I remained silent. I had no sympathy for Haley. Not at all. She had been given everything her entire life. She passed out when it was time for her to stand alone. That must be the result of never having been told no before. However, my parents, they were falling freely. Their ideal daughter had fallen short. Their precious investment was in ruins. I didn't make contact. I needed to concentrate on my own life. I was working at a high-level internship with a prominent San Francisco firm by my senior year. I had established a reputation for being observant, dependable, and efficient. I was trusted by my boss to manage complicated projects and important clients. I had a full-time job offer lined up after graduation and was on schedule to graduate with honors. The failed draft was no longer me. I was now someone, according to my own terms. Then my phone buzzed one day. It was my mother. Curiosity overcame me, and I nearly didn't respond. "Hi, Mom." "Lauren," she said in an overly upbeat tone, a warning symbol. "How have you been?" "Busy," was my blunt response. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Listen, your father and I were wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner this weekend. Haley will be there too." "Oh, it was there. I'm busy," I said. Her voice grew softer as she said, "Please, Lauren. It's been so long since we were all together." I agreed against my better judgment, in part, out of interest. I wanted to see how badly things had come apart. In part, I pulled into the driveway of the house I used to call home on Saturday night. Being back was strange. The old blue siding, the well-kept yard, everything appeared the same, but it felt distinct, somehow smaller. I was met at the door by my mother, who smiled too brightly. "Lauren, you look amazing." I entered. My father was drinking a glass of scotch while seated rigidly at the dinner table. Haley had already taken a seat and was holding her phone. "Lauren," my father nodded. "Dad." Haley's eyes seldom left her phone. Dinner was really weird. In that tense, courteous manner you use when speaking to someone you hardly know, my folks kept inquiring about my work. Haley remained silent. Her nails were neatly manicured, her face was expressionless, and she pushed her food around her plate. My mother cleared her throat at last. Haley has been considering returning to school, she stated cautiously. I arched my eyebrow. Oh? Yes, my father said. But she needs some guidance. I gazed at them. Guidance? My mother responded in a pleasant, syrupy voice. You've done so well in finance. Maybe you could help Haley? Find her something that fits her skills? I set down my fork. You want me to fix her? Of course not, my mother hurriedly exclaimed. Just give her a little push in the right direction. I gave Haley a quick look. As if it didn't matter, she continued to stare at her phone. And what happens if she screws up again? I inquired. Are you going to ask me to bail her out next time too? It's not like that, my father stated. I pulled my chair back and sprang to my feet, saying, It is exactly like that. Haley got everything. She got the expensive school, the endless support, the constant praise. And now that she's tanked, you want me to clean up the mess? My mother's cheeks flushed. Lauren, that's not fair. No, what's not fair is how you treated me my whole life, I replied. You handed Haley every advantage and left me to figure it out on my own. And now you expect me to swoop in and save her? At last, Haley's gaze left her phone. She gave me a look that was neither embarrassed nor angry. Simply put, bored. The words, whatever, she said. It's not my fault they like me more. I clenched my jaw. Yeah. And how's that working out for you now? My mother's mouth moved back and forth. My father gazed at his drink as if he wanted to blend in with it. I said, Thanks for dinner, and turned to face the door. Good luck with Haley. I didn't hold off till they answered. Without turning around, I went outside, got into my car, and drove off. I wasn't upset. No more. I had just finished. I didn't feel like I was losing anything by leaving for the first time in my life, since I wasn't. That seemed to be the end of it. When I left that dinner, I assumed I had made my argument very obvious. I had no intention of making Haley's life better. Their golden child had crashed and burned, but that didn't mean I had to be their backup daughter. However, my parents? They're not easily discouraged. My mother phoned me a few weeks later. I let the voicemail go. Then she gave another call, and once more. I picked it up at last, partly out of curiosity. She chirped, Lauren, sweetheart, how are you? Busy, was my blunt response. Oh, of course. You're so successful now. We're so proud of you, you know. I arched an eyebrow. I had never before made my parents feel proud of me. Not in a way that mattered, anyway. What do you want, Mom? Well, Haley's been feeling a little lost lately, she began, dragging out the word as if it were a major secret. Not a shite. My mother went on to say, she's been talking about starting a business. Something in fashion. You know how creative Haley is? Ingenious. Since third grade, Haley has not come up with a novel idea. She could really use some advice from someone experienced. No, she urged. Lauren, come on, you've done so well in business. Don't you think it would be nice to help your sister get on her feet? No. Lauren, Mom, I ended my conversation. You didn't care when I needed help. Why should I care now? Her voice became piercing. That's not fair, Lauren. It's completely fair. I ended the call. That should be the end of it, I thought. Naturally, though, it wasn't. A month or so later, I received a call from Grandma Margaret. You must come over, sweetheart, she urged in a composed yet solemn tone. Your parents are here. I scowled. Why? They want to talk to you about something important, I said in jest. Is Haley pregnant? No, Grandma replied. Just come. That night, I drove to my grandparents' house against my better judgment. My parents were seated rigidly on the couch when I entered. My mom had on the artificial, over-bright smile. She used to attempt to soften me, and my dad had his hands clenched together. Lauren, she exclaimed, come sit down. I remained upright. What's this about? My father cleared his throat. We've been thinking a lot about the future. Uh-huh. And we realized that, well, it's time to update the family estate. I squinted. What are you talking about? My mother gave me a tense smile. We're updating the will. Oh, it was there. And? And we were thinking it would be fair if the estate was divided equally between you and Haley. I gazed at them. Fair? Yes, my father replied. You've both worked hard. It's only right that you both inherit equally. In fact, I laughed. Aloud, you've got to be kidding me. Lauren, my mother's voice grew piercing. We're trying to make things right, right? I sneered. You gave Haley everything growing up. I had to fight for scraps. Now that she's a complete mess and I'm successful, you think splitting the inheritance will make it even? My father's mouth clenched. It's not about evening things out. Then what is it about? My mom looked anxiously at my dad. They didn't say anything. Then it dawned on me. I exclaimed, "Oh my God!" as my eyes widened. Haley's broke, isn't she? My mother's face turned red. My father glanced at the ground. She's having some difficulties, my mother said. So let me get this straight, I said, increasing the intensity of my voice. Haley blew through whatever savings she had, and now you're trying to make sure she gets half of whatever you leave behind so she has a safety net? Nothing came out of my dad's wide mouth. Shaking my head, I said, Unbelievable. This isn't about fairness. This is about protecting Haley again, like you always have. My mother continued, Lauren, in a gentle and begging tone, we just want to keep the family together. I yelled, There is no together, you made that clear a long time ago. It's not Haley's fault. The words no. It's yours, I responded icily. You created this. You raised her to expect the world to bend over backwards for her. And now that it's falling apart, you think I'm going to clean up the mess? My mother's mouth quivered. My father's expression worsened. I said, I don't need your money, and got to my feet. Keep it. Give it all to Haley for all I care. My mother's eyes grew wide. Lauren, sweetheart, but don't expect me to fix the disaster you created. I walked over to the door. Lauren! I paused. What? My father spoke in a strained tone. You're being cruel. Am I? I retorted. Or am I finally treating you the way you treated me? They both had no response. I walked away without turning around. I completely stopped taking their calls after that. Without them, my life was going well. Actually, more than fine. I accepted a full-time job at San Francisco's Sterling Capital after graduating with honors. Even though the task was hard, I enjoyed it. I did it well. I was elevated to the position of investment specialist in less than 2 years. I managed high-stakes initiatives and sizable customer portfolios. One day, after I assisted in securing a multi-million-dollar account, my supervisor drew me aside. Lauren, he continued, you've got a talent for this. If you keep this up, you'll be running the place one day. I grinned, since I was aware that he was correct. Haley, however, continued to reside at home. She relentlessly pursued unsuccessful business ventures, a blog about fashion, a brand of skincare products, an internet-based jewelry retailer. It was all paid for by my folks. Nothing persisted for more than half a year. My folks always cleaned up after her crashes. Each and every time, I was utterly disconnected, watching from a distance. The world had been given to Haley, and she was unsure of how to use it. Everything the first owned had been constructed from the ground up, and it was evident. Grandma Margaret called me one evening. We've decided to change the will, she replied quietly. Okay, we're leaving everything to you. I straightened my posture. What? You've earned it, she remarked plainly. Haley, well, we love her, but we don't trust her. Are you sure? Yes. I tightened my throat and closed my eyes. Thank you, I said in a whisper. The voice of Grandpa William could be heard over the line. Lauren, he replied, you're the one we believe in. And I didn't simply feel appreciated for the first time in my life. I had a sense of selection. I never returned after that. I ignored my parents' repeated attempts to contact me. Haley never even tried to get in touch. And truthfully, I was okay with that. I had a better life without them. Easier, less noisy. I was elevated to the position of Director of Investments at Sterling Capital after a few years. I handled high-stakes acquisitions, managed multi-million-dollar portfolios, and attended senior board meetings. The business achieved record-breaking results thanks to my tactics. My name began to appear in business journals and financial magazines. I began to be asked for advice. I was the one that everyone wanted to hear from for once. I had constructed something from the beginning, according to my own terms, and I took pride in that. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I heard a familiar voice behind me as I waited in line at the grocery store. Lauren? I pivoted. My mom was the one. She appeared to be older. She had deep creases around her eyes and mouth, and her hair was graying at the roots. More than that, though, she appeared exhausted, worn down. My father was standing beside her, as motionless and rigid as ever. My mother touched her palm to her chest and exhaled, "Oh my God, I can't believe it's you." I remained silent. She said, "You look amazing," as she looked at every inch of me. I didn't try correcting her. I did look fantastic. Tailored jeans, a designer coat, and diamond studs in my ears. The sort of attire that shouted, "I'm successful." My mother responded in an unduly optimistic tone. "How have you been?" "Busy," was my blunt response. "That's wonderful!" she exclaimed, her smile expanding but falling short of her eyes. "Your father and I would love to have you over for dinner sometime. Just to catch up, a family dinner." It nearly made me chuckle. A meal with the family. As if that were any longer significant. "I'm not interested," I answered calmly. Her smile wavered. "Lauren, what do you want?" I interrupted her. She opened and closed her mouth. She then paused, just long enough for me to realize that this was more than a friendly encounter. They weren't in this store by accident. Suddenly, my dad added, "It's about Haley." I didn't remember his voice being so loud. I let out a sigh. "It is, of course." "Already bored?" I asked. "What happened?" My mother's hands clenched. "She's having a hard time." Define hard time. My father's jaw tensed. "She's in debt." "Big debt," my mother hastily added. "The business ventures didn't work out. She took out loans. And now, she's drowning," my father concluded. I folded my arms. "And," my mother continued, "and we were hoping you could help her," in a beseeching tone. I chuckled. "Help her?" My father remarked. "Lauren, you've done so well for yourself. You have the resources. Maybe you could help her get back on her feet," I said. "Let me get this straight," as my voice became more focused. "Haley blew through God knows how much money, and now you want me to swoop in and bail her out?" Tears filled my mother's eyes. "She's your sister," I stated icily. "She's never been my sister." My mother winced. "Lauren," my father replied in a somber and hushed voice. "Please. We don't know what to do anymore." I gazed at them. Their features showed desperation, the silent fear beneath my father's composed demeanor, the entreaty in my mother's eyes. And I came to a realization. They needed me for the first time in my life. Now I was in control. They had made me feel insignificant all my life, causing me to feel inadequate. They were now pleading with me for assistance while standing in front of me. I let the silence to linger. "No," I eventually said. My mother's face fell flat. "What?" I said. "You heard me. No. I'm not fixing this for you. You made this mess. You enabled her. You raised her to expect the world to hand her everything. And now that it's falling apart, you want me to clean it up?" With weakness, my mother said. "She's your sister." "No," I snapped back. "She's your problem." My father's lips formed a narrow line. Tears filled my mother's eyes. "That's not what you mean," my mother said. "Yes, I do." I went around and picked up my luggage. "Lauren," I said, "good luck, behind my back. You're going to need it." After that, I left. I didn't see them again after that. After that, I heard tidbits from my grandparents. Haley's predicament worsened. Calls from debt collectors began. The damage was already done when my parents attempted to bargain with the bank. Once more, Haley returned home. She hopped from one job with little prospects to another. In an attempt to keep her afloat, my parents used their retirement funds. It was unsuccessful. And me? I continued to construct. At Sterling Capital, the first rose to the position of Vice President of Investments. I was then elevated to CEO 3 years later. CEO indeed. On the day of the announcement, I stood in the boardroom, gazing out over the skyline of San Francisco. This life was something I had created myself. No freebies, no safety nets, just perseverance and hard effort. I was 32, the youngest CEO in the history of the business. I then gave my grandparents a call to inform them of the situation. Grandpa William said, "Lauren, we're so proud of you," in an emotional voice. Grandma Margaret went on, "We always knew you'd do it," I muttered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Grandpa said, "You worked for it, so you did it. And because you knew your own worth." I sat by myself in my flat that evening, sipping a glass of champagne. Haley was on my mind. Concerning my parents, how many times I had pleaded with them to see me, to have faith in me. And now? I didn't require their blessing. My life was my own creation. And at last, I was free. I received a letter in the mail a few months later, from an attorney. My parents' will had been amended. Haley was left in charge of everything. When I read it, I chuckled. They did, of course. I didn't care, though. I didn't require their funds. I didn't require their approval. Because, in contrast to Haley, I was self-sufficient. A few weeks later, I ran across Haley's ex-fiancé, Ethan, at a charity dinner. He held a drink of whiskey and was dressed sharply in a suit. He raised an eyebrow, asking, "Lauren?" "Ethan, heard about your promotion." He smiled. "Congratulations." "Thanks. You're a hell of a lot more impressive than your sister ever was," he added, looking across the room. "Simply, I know," I replied. Ethan chuckled. "Want to grab a drink sometime?" "No," I answered in a chilly tone. I left without turning around, because I was no longer required to prove anything to anyone. I was already victorious.